In this tutorial, I'm going to teach you how to use charts within Bubble. So by the time you get to the end of this tutorial, you'll be able to visualize your data in the most beautiful way possible. Now, charting in Bubble can actually get quite complex. So this video will be part of a larger series on data visualization, where we'll start out by working with foundational charts, things like bars and lines, and then we'll progress towards more sophisticated charts, things like candlestick charts, scatter charts, single axis scatter charts, force-directed networks, inverted line charts, scatter charts with binding boxes, scatter charts with jittering, sunburst charts, and even logic flow based charts like this tree map here. Also, I'll be using Nebulum Studio Charts as my Bubble charting plugin. So to install this plugin, just go over to plugins and then search for Nebulum Studio Charts. This is a premium plugin that took us over 1,000 hours of development time. Now, this is simply the most powerful charts plugin for Bubble that's out there. So you can either install it through your plugins tab here, or you can learn more about the plugin by following the link in the description below. However, a lot of the foundational concepts that I'm going to discuss in this tutorial, especially in terms of data structure, will also apply even if you're using Bubble's free charting plugin. So let's jump into this chart here. So after the plugin is installed, you can search for line and bar chart or gradient line and bar chart. Now, the main difference here being that the line and bar chart uses single colors for each series, where the gradient line and bar chart allows you to apply a color gradient between the low and high values in a data set. So let's use the gradient line and bar chart here for now. Now, in order to help you work with these charts, we've pre-populated each chart with sample data so you can see how to structure your own data. Also, within this chart, notice how easy it is to toggle between a line and bar chart. You simply change the value of this drop down here and then refresh your page, and the sample data will be visualized differently depending on which chart type you selected. Also, we're heavily design focused at Nebulum, so you get full control over every visual detail of this chart. Everything from its ability to work in light or dark mode environments, to the gradient orientation, the tooltip design, access colors, grid colors, data hover effects, and so on. It would just be too much to cover all of the design flexibility that we've integrated into this plugin. So what we've done instead is we've just provided comprehensive documentation under each field within the plugin. So you can learn more about what each field controls by simply clicking on this show documentation link here. Also, keep in mind that all of these charts have beautiful built-in animations. So for example, you can toggle on or off the series data here to view any of these animations. And again, for each chart, these animations will look slightly different depending on the chart that you're using. Okay, so back over to our chart. Now, the first thing that you're going to notice here is that we have these 30 values spread along our x-axis, which runs horizontally along the bottom here, and the y-axis, which runs vertically up the side here. Now, before we can plot any data, we need to structure that data properly. Now, in this example, we're working with a bar chart that displays numerical values on the y-axis and categorical values on the x-axis. So let's say that we're charting rainfall data here. Now, the volume of rainfall would be our y-axis values, while the dates when that rainfall occurred would be our x-axis values. Also, keep in mind here that in this example, we're just working with a single series of data. However, all of the charts within Nebulum Studio Charts give you the ability to plot multiple series of data. Now, the first series of data in any chart will always be required. However, all subsequent series will be optional. So by simply leaving the other series data blank, you're essentially telling the plugin to ignore those fields for your specific use case. Now, one essential point when working with charts within Bubble is understanding how X and Y axis values map to one another. So let's imagine that we have our X-axis values down here. These are going to be our dates or our days. Then off to the left here, we're going to have our series 1 data, which will run along this y-axis. So if we were to place these two lists now on top of one another like this, the first value from the first list will map to the first value from the second list, the second value to the second value, the third value to the third value, and so on. This is essential to understand because if you're ever dealing with empty values, you just can't leave them out. So for example, if we had a 0 on day 2, we can't simply leave it empty because then our list will shift over to the left and the mapping of our X and Y values will be all wrong. For this reason, it's important to ensure you always use zeros to represent empty data sources because adding a 0 here will keep the X and Y axis mapping accurate. Also, if we ever have more than one series of data, all subsequent series of data follow the same mapping logic. Now, on a related note, another tricky part when working with comma-separated lists of values is that our X and Y access lists must always have matching counts. Now, that's the number of items in each list. If you have rainfall data for 30 days, you need exactly 30 corresponding date values. If you have 7 access values, you need 7 Y access values. These two counts always need to match. Now, this might seem like an obvious requirement, but honestly, it's one of the most common sources of errors when charting data within Bubble. If your X and Y values counts don't align, most charting plugins or tools will either throw an error or produce unexpected results. So what I always suggest people do when working with our charting plugin is that they create multiple fields in their front end where they can at least temporarily visualize these comma-separated lists of values as well as the counts of those values. Now, you can always remove these temporary input fields in Bubble later on to clean up your application, but using these placeholders early ensures that you're not working blind. The intention, obviously, is to drill into your data source accurately, but the truth is, when you're working with dynamic values, you won't be able to see the output values until they're charted. So essentially, you can't see the actual list that you're feeding into the chart. In this example so far, we've just been working with these hard-coded values in the property fields here. And this, of course, will work just fine. But as you know, if you're working in Bubble, it's more common to use dynamic values when charting data. So we're not speaking in abstractions. Let me just quickly do that now. So, for example, if I selected do a search for and then I searched for rainfall, I could chart each item's days for my x-axis values, and I could do another search for each item's rainfall amount for this other series data here. But as you can see, this isn't going to allow me to view the comma-separated list of values. Instead, I'm forced just to kind of assume that the count, the data type, and the formatting is all correct. In this example above, when we were hard-coding the values, it was possible to see the data that we were working with. But notice now how when we're working with dynamic data that we can't see these values any longer. So as I mentioned, to overcome this blind spot, we can add an input field onto our canvas here, and then simply copy and paste our X and Y axis values into these input fields in order to visualize the data. So for example, here I'll add my rainfall data by drilling into each item's rainfall data. And here I'll add the X axis date values by drilling into each item's date or day. What I always do is I just copy and paste the expression from my chart into these input fields to ensure I'm working with exactly the same expression or the same data. So as you can see, when we refresh the page, we can actually now see these comma-separated lists of values here. Now, in many cases, even if you're working with hard-coded data, it might be easy to get the count, remember, which is just the number of items in each list. And you can often do this by just eyeballing it. For example, in our first example, we might be able to see or just quickly count that we have 30 values in each list here. But as these lists get bigger, it's going to become much more challenging to manually count or eyeball it. So a better approach is to use the count operator in Bubble. So in Bubble, what we'll do here is we'll add a new input field to the canvas here, and we'll drill into the data again for both our X and Y axis values. Now with these input fields on the canvas, we'll append the count operator onto the end of the expression here. Now keep in mind that if you're working with a static list of comma-separated values, you probably won't have access to the count operator. So for example, notice that I've added an input field here with values in it that I want to count. So in this case, I won't be able to count how many items are in this comma-separated list of values because it's being read as a string. So in this case, we need to first use the split by operator in Bubble, which is very similar to the split method in JavaScript. We simply select this input field's value, and then we select split by. Now next, we'll enter a comma in this input field here, and then once we finish this, we can search for the count operator. Now, when we refresh our page again, we'll see the count of the number of values in each of our lists show up down here. Now, admittedly, these input fields make the application that we're working on look really bad, but like I mentioned previously, we can remove these input fields later, or simply turn their visibility off by clicking on this tab here, and then just select this option here, which says this element is visible on page load. Now, the chart will still be able to read data from any invisible input fields on the page. So if you wanted to, you could actually have your chart reference these input fields as well, even if the input fields will be invisible to your front-end users. Okay, so now all of our data is looking really good as comma-separated lists of values for both our X and Y axis, and our counts are also the same. And now we know what data precisely we're feeding into this chart, and we've overcome the issue of having that blind spot because we can now see the data that our chart is going to be working with. Now, as a side note here, if for whatever reason your data comes back reversed, showing the last item first, for example, the simple way around this is to drill into your database search expression here and then just add a new sorting rule by clicking on sort by and then select the field you want to sort by. So for example, we could select the date field and then select either ascending or descending. Alternatively, if you do not have a relevant field, for example, a date field to map your ordering to, you can simply use our free plugin called Reverse Lists, which allows you to reverse comma-separated lists of numbers or texts. Also, we have many free Bubble plugins that will help you manage or even create lists of data. So for example, we have a free plugin called List of Dates Generator that will help you create lists of dates if you're not storing date values in your own database. We also have a List of Numbers Generator plugin, which allows you to create a linear or random list of numbers. Another plugin you might find valuable is our plugin, which allows you to merge multiple lists together into a single list. And lastly, we also have a free Math.js plugin that allows you to work with more complex mathematical calculations within Bubble. So I'll link to all of these free plugins below. So I'm going to wrap it up there for this tutorial. This concept of visualizing the data that you're feeding into the chart, sorting it, and counting the number of items in each list is fundamental when it comes to working with charts within Bubble. Similarly, it's essential that you understand how your X and Y axis values map to one another. Remember, it's the first value maps to the first value, second value to second value, and so on. So in this example, we just worked with a simple line and bar chart tool, but this logic applies even to more advanced charts within Nebulum Studio Charts, like our candlestick chart, our scatter charts, and our polar bar charts, to name only a few examples. So again, if you want to get access to these charts, a link to this Bubble charting plugin can be found below. Alternatively, if you find all of this intriguing, but you're not so much a do-it-yourselfer and you'd like to work with a team that can build complex data visualization tools for you, be sure to head over to Nebulum and click on Contact in the top navigation bar. Simply fill out the form on that page and let us know more about what you're trying to build. Even if you're just pressure testing an idea, we'd be more than happy to chat with you about it. So that's all I have for you for today. Thanks for stopping by, and remember, a link to the next tutorial in the series can be found below.